is the author of the book The Flight Ticket, published in 1994, The African Dream 2005, The Upward Path 2008. As a consultant, he has written papers and delivered public lectures both in Nigeria and internationally on supply chain management, security management, effective communication and written skills, public relations, industrial relations, crisis management, and job creation strategies. He is currently an executive director of Book Society of Nigeria and founder and chief executive, the African Dream Reality Project, an initiative aimed at developing creative writing and filmmaking as veritable tools for solving the problems of poverty, hunger, and disease in Africa. Joseph Edoki lives in Lagos, Nigeria, and is happily married with children.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome to yet another episode of One on One with me, Patricia Nkwane, a place where we discuss issues of concern to Africa. We interview CEO, PACESETTers, game changers across the world as a way of retaining hope and changing the mindset of our African people. And today on our show, I'll be interviewing an amazing gentleman, the author of one book that I read. You know, the first time I went through that book, I was wowed. I was really wowed. The African Dream. It's one of those books that will get you to see Africa from a whole different lens altogether, from a lens of hope. Well, without jinxing it and spoiling it for you, allow me to welcome Mr. Joseph Edoki here to come and talk more and give hope to our fellow Africans in understanding Africa and seeing Africa from the hope that he had while he was writing The African Dream.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. I am Joseph Edoki. Joseph Edoki was born in 1964 in Agbor, Delta State, south of Nigeria. I was educated in Agbor. I studied a number of courses, both at the primary, secondary, and at university level. I studied for diploma in English. I studied marine resources, agricultural economics, and supply chain management. Thereafter, I acquired a number of professional knowledge in the areas of supply chain management, logistics, maritime security, customer relations, etc., etc. Joseph Edoki has been working in a number of organizations. I've been privileged to work in large organizations, multinational organizations, spanning from commercial agriculture up to oil and gas, both onshore and offshore, and what we call the downstream and the upstream. I've been involved in both downstream and upstream operations in the oil and gas in Nigeria. And I have been involved in training of professionals, training of leaders both in the executive arm of government, legislative arm of government, and the judiciary. I've gone around Nigeria training in different organizations, especially in the areas of corporate management, leadership, value reorientation and attitudinal change, crisis management, and maritime security. These are the areas I have been involved in. Besides that, I have been involved in writing. My first novel was published in 1994, titled The Flight Ticket. My second novel was published in 2005. That is The African Dream, the subject of our discussion today. Thereafter, you have the sequel to The African Dream, which is called The Upward Path, published in 2008. The African Dream, which is the one we have been promoting for the past 15 years, has been turned into a movie, into a series. We have the audiobook and we have the ebook to ensure that it goes around Africa and the entire world because of the nature of what is contained therein. And I'll be talking more about the African dream and what the activities that are involved in the African dream, especially what we call the African Dream projects based in Lagos, Nigeria. That's all for the start.
Wow, a man of so many hats. Hey, a man of so many hats, and very, very inspirational, I tell you. And I think, like you're saying, we are going to try and focus more on the African dream, a book that captures beautifully the hope of Africa. One of the books that I went through, I know I was listening to the audio book and I was thinking, if only this book could be what all Africans go through, then our hope will be different. Maybe if we can start over here, what was the inspiration behind this amazing book?
Yes, the idea to write the African Dream first came to me in 1995. That was when Nigeria was passing through military dictatorship, and we were supposed to have a democratic government starting from 1993. We call it June 12th. Every Nigerian knows the story of June 12th. So I was actually pained by the fact that that transition led to nowhere, and military now came back. During that period, there were a lot of demonstrations and a lot of activities with respect to campaign for democracy. And I was a young writer then. And you know, writers have a responsibility to be able to mirror the society through their writings. So I started putting one or two things together in November 2015. I didn't really know it will become a book as it is today. So because then I was also working, you know, I've been working in a number of organizations. So while working, I also find time to be putting down some of my thoughts. So, and because I was involved and I saw the challenges, and I felt that I have an idea of what can be done to bring about a better Nigeria and, by extension, a better Africa. So I started putting my thoughts together. As I was writing, more and more things were coming into my mind, and I was capturing them. And recall that I have had experience, you know, I've been working as a manager. As a matter of fact, I was already a manager in Unilever Group, you know, Unilever of London. I was a development manager then in Pamo Nigeria Limited, which was a subsidiary of Unilever PLC of London. So I have undergone so many training, talking about managing of manpower, managing of machine, managing of other resources. So with my idea, my imagination, and the experiences I've had, so I now started thinking of what can I do as an individual to improve the lot of the Nigerian and the African in general. So I now started developing the story. Of course, I came up with the thematic trust, which has to be leadership, poverty, hunger, and disease. I was able to identify poverty, hunger, and disease as the major challenges we have in Africa. So I wove, the story was now written across. What do we do? I now realize that what we have in Africa is more of a nightmare. What we have in Africa is more of a nightmare. But beyond the nightmare, there should be a dream. And I called it the African Dream. Of course, when I started writing, more and more ideas were coming to my head. The first work, as a matter of fact, when it was published, it was 510 pages. It was so large. So we started thinking of what do we do to encourage readers and make it reader friendly. So we started thinking of how to bring it down until we were able to get 312 pages that was eventually published. Now, the African Dream revolves around a young man called Fernando. So what I did was to invest so much resourcefulness on this young man, giving him the vision, the creative vision that will enable him tackle the problems in Africa. So I look at it vision, we look at vision of Fernando, who should be the vision of every young and forward-looking African. Then I talked about the challenges. If somebody will have to solve the problems of Africa, he or she will have to pass through a number of challenges. So I created those challenges, you know, with my creative ingenuity or creative vision, so to speak. I was able to simulate those challenges. What are the challenges? Of course, the ruling class will rise against him. Even the people that he's trying to work for, they will also reject him. So as I was putting those challenges, I was putting them in the story, using it to create it. I knew that for somebody to be able to do that, he needed resources, but I made sure that Fernando was somebody who had nothing, so that it will also encourage people who want to make a change in their life to know that you don't have to start from the top. So Fernando had little or nothing. He was poor, and he was thinking of addressing the problem of poverty. So the challenges were Herculean. So, but how he was able to overcome the challenges formed part of the introductory part of the African dream. Then later on now, when he now had the opportunity of winning the election in a free and fair election, even without resorting to usual campaign of calumny, without resorting to tribalism, without resorting to religion, without resorting to use of money, the kind of things you have in African politics. So that is to show that it's actually possible for a visionary man, a man of good character, to ascend the throne in any area of leadership in Africa and bring about the change. And what is the change we're trying to talk about? Changing the story of human misery, human suffering, poverty, hunger, and disease. And how he did that was demonstrated in the African dream, showing that the steps to take. And I was able to do that because I have been involved in job creation all through the years. I have worked in National Directorate of Employment as a monitoring officer. I have worked in organizations where I managed so many people, created jobs, hired people, trained people. So with all this at my background knowledge, I was able to put it into fiction. I've been involved in consultancy, training of how to create jobs across Nigeria, even involving some governors in Nigeria who believed that I could do it, and they hired me to do that. I have also been involved in human capital or human development analysis and all that. So putting all that together, I was able to put a story that we now call the African dream.
The African dream. Wow. Yes. A story that breaks the narratives. Indeed, a story that breaks the narratives. You know, looking at this story and looking at the story around the narratives around Fernando's, it takes me to our point in time. Year after year, we have young people breaking into the media space, going into media houses with an idea of selling the hope and trying to shed the light of Africa from the lenses of their cameras, from the writings of their articles. But for some reason, as I was going through this book, I loved how you illustrated Fernando's time as a writer, where, you know, he was avoiding being direct when it comes to addressing issues of Africa. And my question to you is this problem still evident today? Because we have heard stories of people being arrested in certain countries of Africa because they took pictures or they went and took videos in gatherings where they were not supposed to. This problem of trying to shed the light of Africa using media, is it still evident according to you? And how do we solve that one?
Okay, thank you for that very important question. You recall that the historical background to my story is 20th century Africa. So talking about The story actually opened up way back in the early 80s, talking about 40 years ago. The story has changed now. Why? Because of social media. Before now, it was a bit difficult for for people to write about the things happening in government because of the issues of repression. Repression. Journalists were being repressed, especially during the military era. So, but now the story has changed. So, in the case of Fernando, recall that Fernando was a lecturer. So, being a lecturer, he knew that if he was so direct, he could be victimized. So, to avoid victimization, he was writing in the newspapers, but he would not mention names, for example. So, in Africa, it has been like that. But you recall, if you check what is happening in social media now, that we now have what we call citizen journalists. Citizen journalist, the man stays in his house and writes a story. He can be writing from Botswana, he can be writing from Cameroon, he can be writing from Venezuela, he can write just there, and the whole world is his audience. It wasn't like that 40 years ago. So the story has changed. So Africans now have a major tool, a major vehicle. And what is that vehicle? That veritable tool or vehicle is social media. Because in the social media space, there is no time, there is no distance. So once you are able to capture what you have, your content, immediately you send it to the entire world. The entire human race will have an idea of what you are trying to talk about. And you keep saying it. Somehow, somewhere, someone will hear you'll be interested, and you will push it forward. Unlike what we used to have in the conventional media, where you have the newspapers. The newspapers were owned by bourgeoisie businessmen who needed to make money. Their objective was basically profit maximization. And you cannot make and maximize profits when you now begin to go against the power that be, those who pay the bills. So it was difficult. But now all those things have changed. Even then, the media was controlled basically by the government. Like in Nigeria, for instance, we didn't have any private radio as at 1980, 1990. We didn't have any private television. But as I speak to you, Nigeria has over 100 private radio stations, over 100 television stations. Of course, you cannot mention the number of blogs, people who have access to information, and they disseminate it on time, online, real time, across the entire world. So I think the story has changed.
Yeah, it has definitely shifted. Your book it touches on something that is very, very close to the hearts of every African, whether it's your South Africa, your Botswana, your Zimbabwe, your Ghana, something that is very, very close to our hearts: poor governance. And some of the effects of poor governance is your corruption, your implementation of unfair policies, poor economic growth, and I want you to touch a little bit on this and how we see this playing currently in Africa.
Yes, poverty is a major issue in Africa, and it is one of the sub-themes in the African dream. I talk so much about poverty. I didn't just dwell on poverty, but I talk about the manifestation, the causes, then more importantly, how it can be eradicated from Cape to Cairo. I discuss extensively what we need to do. I look at it from the angle of root cause analysis. What is the root cause of poverty? And the root cause of poverty, if you ask me, is unemployment. If someone is employed, if we can have everybody, every able-bodied man or woman above 18 having a job, poverty will be reduced drastically. So how do we create employment? Where is there unemployment? There's unemployment because of bad leadership. And that bad leadership is resulting from issues in the way of corruption. There's so much corruption in Africa as a continent. It is not something, it is not an allegation. It's not something somebody is just thinking about. It's something that is real. You can see the stories, you can see it, you can touch it, you can feel it all over Africa. So that is the reason why there's unemployment. Why are Africans migrating to Europe, migrating to Canada, migrating to Asia? They are migrating because there are no jobs at home. Now, why are there no jobs? You ask yourself that question. For example, agriculture is supposed to employ over 80% of the entire workforce, but our agriculture is still at the rudimentary level. How come that we've not been able to turn it around? You see that address in the African Dream. Fred Edo took steps to find out the root cause, and he realized that when people have jobs, poverty issue will be reduced to the barest minimum. So it has to be job creation. And interestingly, I'm a job creation consultant. I've been involved in job creation across, and I have have a lot of slides, a lot of lectures on job creation. I've done job creation training in Nigeria and outside Nigeria, especially in Ghana and other places. I've done it, bringing policymakers to come and understand the principles of job creation. Across Nigeria, I've done it to the executive, legislators, members of House, commissioners, and the rest of them. I have done training, inviting them and giving them the principles of job creation. All those principles were highlighted in the African Dream. They were dramatized. So put in a perspective so that everybody can have access to it. Job creation starts from activity. Economic activity will lead to productivity. It is productivity that will now give rise to profits. And once you are able to get involved in an economic activity that is profitable and sustainable, then you have sustainability that will bring about reduction in poverty. If every young man, every young woman across Africa wakes up in the morning by 6 o'clock and goes to his or workplace, either you are in the school teaching, or you are in the bank providing service, or you are in the barber workshop, or you are a driver, or you are buying and selling, somebody should be doing something. If everybody is doing something, you are adding value. It is that value that somebody is paying for. And it is the payment, that revenue, that enables you to have profitability and sustainability of the business. And once that is done and you earn a living, then poverty has been reduced drastically. That's what happens in Europe. That's what happens in China. That's what happens in America. People work. But in this part of the world, you see young men and women, they wake up in the morning and we're talking about Chelsea versus Arsenal versus Man U. They will talk about that from morning to night, to midnight. It shouldn't be. And it is leadership that has to correct it. It has to be corrected through leadership, because leadership is about vision. And what is vision? Vision has to be the ability to create a better future by programs, by policies, by projects. It is leadership that will bring about that change. And that has been demonstrated through the African Dream.
You know, I like when you say it is leadership that has to create it. And I'm wondering, as you were talking, I was wondering to myself to say, right now we live in an Africa that is so fascinated in building new malls than building industry. And come to think of it, when we now start to talk about leadership, and I'm wondering in my curiosity to say, when it comes to African leaders, do you think that maybe our problem is a problem of high expectations? Because I'm saying this because you look into it, there was an era where Zimbabwe was going through the most, and they had to move from Mugabe to Mnangagwa with expectation. An era where South Africa was moving from Thabo Mbeki to Zuma with and we see this playing all across Africa, only for us to be caught up in the same vicious cycle. And I'm wondering, is it a problem of expectation or what? Maybe if you can get us to understand.
Yeah, I think Africa has come a long way. Starting from the days of Kwame Nkrumah, he had a vision of Pan-Africanism. In the days of Ahmadu Bello in Nigeria, Azikiwe, Obafemi Awolowo, then coming back to even South Africa, Zimbabwe, the days of Rhodesia, I still recall even before the independence struggle, days of Muzorewa, in Ndabani Sitole, Ebe Muzorewa, the former president, Joshua Nkomo, and the other former president that ruled for so many years. I could recall the vision that we espoused by the Zimbabweans, Vision that was espoused by Ghanaians, Nigerians. Of course, South Africa was passing through a stage of struggle. If you put all this vision together, you realize that all through the years, that same period, Southeast Asia, they were passing through the same phase. When I talk of Southeast Asia now, I'm referring to countries like Malaysia, countries like Thailand, countries like India. They were passing through South Korea. They were passing through the same phase. Today, they are called the Asian Tigers because they were able to move from vision to reality. What is the vision? A mental picture of a possible future. We saw it 40, 50 years ago. How come we are still in the doldrum? It's leadership. There's no other way to look at it. Now, leadership is not the job of a leader to create job per se, to create employment, but they have to, and it is very necessary, create the enabling environments. They have to create the enabling environment because it has been found out through research and empirical study that government has no business being in business. So the best way is for them to come up with policies, programs, and projects, come up with laws that will enable jobs to be created. You find out in African Dream. For instance, African Dream was trying to talk about banking, that the bank is the fulcrum of every economy. So one of the ways to create jobs, the banks will have to give credit facility to people. It happens in China. It happens in America. It happens in Japan. The bank is usually the engine of growth. So the bank has a major role to play, and the banks are being guided by the leaders through their policy instruments. So these are all the things that we're looking at. And if you now look at it from that perspective, you understand why government has a major role to play. And you also understand that Africans should stop talking about colonialism. We are past that era. We should stop talking about neo-colonialism, but rather we should begin to think about how can Africa develop Africa. Many years ago, a great scholar talked about how Europe underdeveloped Africa, but that was years ago. Now we should be talking about how Africa underdeveloped Africa, and how can Africa get out of the quagmire that we find ourselves.
Like, truly speaking, we are really past an era of pointing fingers and blaming other people for our problems. You know, when I read the part where Fernando was giving his speech, there is something that he said when he was saying the youth of Africa are hungry and angry. And I read that and I was like, we still are. We are still are. The African youth are still hungry and angry and are pushed into desperation. And, you know, I would really love for you to talk a bit on that one.
Yes. Now, let me say something. If you see the beginning of the work in chapter 4, Fernando was described as an angry young man. Fernando was described as an angry young man. It was that anger. Anger is an emotion. As a matter of fact, anger is supposed to be a negative emotion, but it can be exploited for good. In other words, you can be angry, and that anger will propel you into doing something great. Somebody called it, Napoleon Hill called it magnificent obsession. You can be obsessed by, you know, something. You know, anger can actually make you to get to the point where you want to bring about change. Because starting school, if you are so comfortable, you are in the comfort zone, you are not likely going to begin to think of how to get out of where you are. Fernando was an angry young man. And there are so many angry young men in Africa today. And it is expected that these angry young men, if they are armed with vision, they are armed with vision, with skills, they will be able to get themselves out of where we find ourselves. But leadership is key, because no matter how intelligent you are, if you have a bad leader ruling you, then your intelligence will be useless. In chapter 4, Fernando talked about how the best brains and the best hands have to leave their country and go to other lands, because leaders are making policies and laws, obnoxious policies and laws. Come to Nigeria, for example, you see a lot of people migrating, professors, doctors. I want to believe the same is applicable to many African countries. They are migrating because there's not much you can do to change the situation. when you are not involved in policy making. So they have to migrate because first of all, they need to survive. They need to pay their bills. They need sustainability. You know, they have to meet their physiological needs, which is very basic before you can think of any other thing. So human instinct is to survive first. So if you discover that you cannot survive in Africa, of course you have to migrate. See what is happening across the Mediterranean, where our youths are taking risk, maximum risk. They enter raft. Some of them enter canoe, just small Mongo Park, the kind of boat that Mongo Park used when he came to Africa. That's the kind of boat that some of our Africans are using to migrate across the Mediterranean because they are in search of greener pasture. They want to run away from home. Some people, they even sell their property, sell their father's property, everything, because they want to go to Europe. So why is it happening? It's happening because they don't see hope. So Africa, youths are in search of hope. And because they are in search of hope, they will be restless. Some of them have become despondents. And despondency is not something that we should allow in Africa. The only way to get out of it is to ensure that we have the good leaders. And part of what the African Dream is doing is to raise the awareness. It may not be in 1 day or 2 days, because change, no matter how beneficial it is, takes time. Human beings by nature they are adverse to change. So gradually we'll get there by through, for example, what I'm trying to do now. I hope and I believe that with time, every African should be able to read the African Dream. Those who cannot read, they should be able to watch the film. Those who cannot watch, they should be able to listen to the audio. That's why I'm doing all the things I'm doing in this African Dream project. And it's part of my contribution to nation building and to bring about the Africa of my dreams.
Wow. That's really, this is very profound. It's very, very profound. And I think I read that, I saw that, and I was like, you know what, this is so profound. And I love the fact that you went a step ahead to make sure that it gets to everyone. Them that could read, they can read. Those that can listen, those that can watch. And now my question to you, Mr. Edoki, is how, because I feel like we're still in the same place. The times you read about the story of Fernandez, how he came in and where he found Africa, what he celebrated and stood up for. And I feel like we are still in the times before Fernandez. And I want to understand, according to you, how do we solve the problem of poor governance? Because we're not going anywhere. For some reason, we are still complaining about the same thing, worrying about the same thing. We go into elections with expectations, and we are promised change, only for us to be a few steps back again, to come to hope and then few steps back again. How do we solve this problem of poor governance?
Okay, because poverty is such an important and a very critical issue, it is worth the while for us to talk about it over and over again. Now, I want to start by also reiterating what I said earlier on. Job creation is very important. Besides job creation, education is key. Because you look at the nature of jobs we are having in the world today now, they are not just jobs that have to do with your hand and your strength, your power as a human energy, but has to do with your brain. So education is very important. We need to, first of all, begin to redirect our youths to acquiring the education and skills that are in line, that can create jobs for them. For example, if you went to university to study medicine, if you don't have a job, if a hospital don't employ you, of course you can begin to practice your medicine in your house, and you have people who will come to your house and you treat them. If you study automobile engineering, even if you don't have a company that wants to employ you, you can have an automobile workshop beside your house. And somebody now comes there and you tell, okay, this is you are able to solve this problem. Because job creation is about problem solving. The more problems you have in a society, the more potentials for job creation. That's why it pains me that there's so much unemployment in Africa, where there are so many problems. Every problem solved is a job created. For you to solve a problem, you need to create jobs. So that is the concept of job creation. So, and if you have a job goes with a wage. Of course, although I know that in this part of the world, we have a lot of people who are earning starvation wage, because if you want to begin to look at the issue of wage now, you look at wage, starvation wage, whether it's starvation wage, whether it's a living wage, whether it's a competitive wage or affluent wage. These are different categories of wages. But if you don't have, if you may be poor, but there's a difference between being poor and miserably poor. There's a difference between being poor and extremely poor. Job, if you don't have a job, you will be miserably poor, because without a job, you can't meet your basic needs, physiological needs, you can't meet them. So it goes back to, what do we now do? You will discover that that young man, that young woman that has been looking so frustrated, so miserable, the day he has a job and begin to earn some amount of money, either monthly or weekly or daily, his life will begin to change. If you have a better job, of course, a better quality of life. Some of our contemporaries, some of our brothers and sisters who are traveling abroad, sometimes when they leave, they look so miserable in Africa, but when they cross the Mediterranean and go to cross the Atlantic and the Pacific, by the time they come back a year, 2 years later, because they have a job doing, they're not going there to go and play. So it's all about job creation. And this thing called job creation, I have taken my time, written works, done a lot of research, and I've tried to put it in a way that it can be understood by everybody. But if it takes time for people to understand that it's all about job creation, look at the parliaments across Africa. Who is talking about job creation? If they're talking about job creation, they are talking about job creation from the generic sense. They begin to talk about economic policies. Some of these economic policies cannot apply in Africa for so many reasons, which we don't have the time to talk about. So you look at what we call appropriate technology. You look at appropriate technology and appropriate economic policy that will work. China adopted similar things. China look at their own environment and realize that they have some advantages in terms of population, in terms of markets, and they look inward. Africa has that advantage. We have the population, we have the markets. But how come Africa is not trading between themselves? For you to move from one part of Africa to another part of Africa, you will need a visa. Why should it be? So if Africa can trade amongst herself, because trading is one of the ways in which you can take away poverty. When people are trading, resources are being mobilized, and you are exchanging resources, and economic activities are taking place. Economic activity gives rise to revenue. It is revenue that brings about profits. And once you are doing something that is profitable, automatically you are gainfully employed. And when you are gainfully employed, it has a multiplier effect on the economy, like your GDP, like the quality of life, like the income, per capita income, all these things. All those things will now reduce the misery index. That misery index is equivalent to the poverty rate. Every country that has a high misery index has a high level of poverty. Take across, go to across Africa, you can see the misery index is so high. And the African didn't talk about the misery index. A lot of people in this part of the world are miserable. So the human suffering in this part of the world can be reduced if people have jobs. People who are jobless are likely going to be homeless. People who are homeless are likely going to be hopeless. People who are hopeless are likely going to be frustrated. They will be angry, like the angry young man portrayed in the African dream.
Yes. I think in just a few words, I want you to tell us about the African Dream program.
The African Dream proper, if I heard you right.
The African Dream project.
Okay, the African Dream project. Okay. The African Dream project is my own brainchild. I just decided that all the ideas I have on how to address the African problem should be put to the fore. I shouldn't keep it within myself. It all starts with a vision. And what is a vision? A vision is a mental picture of a preparable future. So I have my own vision of how Africa, what Africa should do, and what Africa will be in the nearest future. So that is the starting point. Now, the African Dream project is how we can use good governance and exemplary leadership and good citizenship to bring about a positive change that will reduce poverty, hunger, and disease, and then human suffering. That's what it's all about. And I realize that this can be done through, creating awareness of the need for change. And the awareness can only come through the media. It is through media that will bring about awareness. So, of course, I have it in the book. After having it in the book, realizing that the reading culture of many Africans is not encouraging. So, because I know that this thing is urgent and critical, I cannot just keep it in the book. And I will not allow it to just be, it's not just an academic work. As I speak to you, a number of African countries, a number of African universities, colleges are using the African dream as a study test, which is a way to help us achieve that. In Nigeria, for instance, about 8 universities are using it as a study test. Colleges of education across the country, they are using it. So it's expected that the youth who now read those books, because I recall, the books you read as you are growing up, it will always have impact on you. For instance, when the book like Cry the Beloved Country, there's no way I can forget Cry the Beloved Country. There's no way I can forget Weep Not Child. There's no way I can forget Things Fall Apart. These are books that we read while we were growing up. So similarly, when they now read African Dream, these youths, these young ones, who will eventually become leaders of tomorrow, they will, one or two of them will want to be a Fernando. Just like some of us admire somebody like Mandela, and we want to be like a Mandela. So that is the creation of the awareness. Then I now went beyond that and started putting it in a movie. Of course, we have the movie. And it's a very, very expensive and challenging project, but ambitious. And because to put the African dream in a movie was difficult. So I now decided, okay, let's now do it in a series. So we have it in a series. So you can read the book. We also have it in ebook in Amazon. You can go to Amazon and read it. So it means it can go across the world. You have the audio version. You can listen to the audio version. And we're also breaking it down in small parts and trying to talk about it on YouTube. So all this put together, coupled with the fact that I have been invited across Nigeria and outside Nigeria to talk about the African dream, so many places. Everywhere I go to, where I deliver a lecture, I talk about it and I demonstrate it, and I get the positive response. I do not expect the change to come overnight. Change is usually gradual. So I believe that with what I'm doing in African Dream, which is creating awareness and stimulating the interest of the current and future generation to bring about change, it's never too late. But one thing is important, we should realize that we are on the wrong path. The Chinese will say, no matter how far you have traveled on the wrong road, turn back. Africa is on the wrong road. That's obvious. So we need to turn back and begin to think of what do we now do to redress these challenges. We're on the wrong road. A situation where the level of poverty, a lot of people are hungry. When you see the face of a typical African on television, as an African child, it's not something to write home about. So that is what the African Dream Project is all about. And it's not a project that will accomplish in just 1 or 2 days. It's not a project for only me. It's a project that will involve so many people. So a lot of people are getting involved in that project and doing their own part to achieve our desired goal.
Yeah. Talking of us achieving our desired goal and empowering and inspiring Africa. We as Bridge African Magazine, we are also in the whole business of promoting Africa, Africans, the beauty, the culture of Africa. And I think maybe just so you could give us a pat on the back a little bit and talk about Bridge African Magazine. How are you liking what we are doing?
Yes, there's what we call strategic partnership. Strategic partnership. People who are doing similar things need to partner one way or the other. When I got to know about Bridge Africa, I was excited because I realized that what I have, the kind of vision I have, is similar to their own vision. It's about Africa. And we now started thinking about how do we partner. So partnership like what we are doing now, you trying to know what I'm doing and trying to push it across the global space is part of the partnership. I like what you are doing in the sense that African problem will have to be solved by Africans. And Bridge Africa is, trying to do it starting from, and you are using the media. Media is a veritable tool for social change. It's a veritable tool for development in every society. And social media is very, very instrumental because it has the capacity to penetrate. It is not restricted by time and space. There's no distance, there's no time in social media. So that gives you, so it's a very powerful tool for you to be able to disseminate information, for you to be able to bring about positive change, for you to stimulate, create awareness, stimulate interest, and get people to be mobilized. So I like what Bridge Africa is doing, and I'm happy to be part of the Bridge African initiative.
Wow. Wow, amazing. Well, we are going to go for a very short break. We'll be right back after the break.
It's one-on-one. It's one-on-one, yeah. Welcome to One-on-One with CEOs and PACESETTERS.
All right, welcome back at the One-on-One with me here, Patricia, a place where we are talking issues that are of concern to Africa. And I'm here with Mr. Edoki, who is the author of The African Dream, quite a very interesting book, an exciting book, one of the books that captures beautifully the hope of Africa, that gives you one of the reasons why you need to believe eventually there would be change in Africa. And I think, Mr. Edoki, before we could actually call it a wrap, I want you to share your words of encouragement to a fellow African, to the young people of Africa, to somebody that is caught up in a space of thinking, you know what, things will never be better. Somebody that is caught up in thinking there is no need for us to keep voting or keep trying to change, somebody that is at the edge of giving up in Africa. Your words of encouragement to us right now.
Yes, there is hope in our future. Africa is actually the hope of the entire human race. History has it that the world started from this part of the globe. You recall the cradle of Asian civilization, Egypt. Egypt is an African nation, and we all know the things that Egypt taught the entire human race, be it science, be it mathematics, culture, etc. So the human civilization started from Africa and is coming back to Africa. We have realized our problems, or better still, we are getting to realize our problems. We shouldn't dwell on those problems. For example, I hate to hear about colonialism. No. The colonialists have come, they have gone. Many countries were colonized, and those countries are doing very well today. So if the countries that were colonized are doing very well, so why should we be dwelling on colonialism, how Europe underdeveloped Africa? Yes, that is good for historical documentation, for us to know where we're coming from, so that we'll be able to know where to go. So there's hope. The level of despondency that cuts across Africa, from Cape to Cairo, Mogadishu to Morocco, is not acceptable. The youth have to be trained and retrained. I'm talking about value reorientation and attitudinal change. They need to begin to have another perspective. There are so many things that are beautiful about Africa. So many. In fact, if you read the sequel to the African Dream, you see the picture very well. You see a beautiful Africa. So there are so many things that are good about this country, about Africa. There are so many things that are good about Nigeria. So many things that are good about Tanzania, South Africa, Ghana, Egypt, Botswana, Malawi. There are a lot of good things. So those good things, we can be looking at those good things, and that will give us hope. Hope is something that when you lose it, you have lost all. Africans should not lose hope, because our future is great. We have the resources that the world is looking for. We have the human resource, the material resource. It's just about how to harness these resources. In today's world, we have moved from comparative advantage to competitive advantage. That's the concept of value chain. Moving from comparative advantage to competitive advantage. Africa have no option. We have to flow in that direction. It means we must be competitive globally. Talking about cost competitiveness, global competitiveness in terms of our thinking, in terms of our products. As the saying goes, good thinking, good products. And the good thinking has to start from our mindsets. Negative thoughts of hopelessness cannot be called good thinking. So good thinking means it is possible. According to Napoleon Hill, whatever the mind of a man can conceive and believe, it can achieve. So conceiving a greater nation, conceiving a better environment, once you conceive it and believe it, you can achieve it. Because science and technology has given us a tool to liberate ourselves from the shackles of poverty, hunger, and disease. Science and technology, that's the tool. Like research, for example, with research and development, you can actually get away from the dundrum of poverty, hunger, and disease, and move to a higher pedestal, which is what we hope for. So there's hope for Africa. So the young youth who are in search of hope, they should know that, according to the Kenyan writer, this how do you put it? Shall no longer possess the sky. The cloud shall no longer possess the sky. Weep not child, if you recall, weep not child, weep not darling. With these kisses, let me hold by these clouds shall no longer possess the sky. Meaning that the clouds will not remain there. There is a ray of hope, and that ray of hope in a rainy, stormy weather is what I can see in Africa.
Wow, wow, so beautiful, so beautiful, and I believe that's the hope that we need right now. That's the hope that we all need, and I'm very grateful. Thank you so much, Mr. Edoki, for taking time out of your busy schedule to come and resuscitate our hope, give us the hope that we need in this very moment. And I think maybe before I get to say bye to you, if you can maybe for a moment, for a minute or so, for somebody that has been listening to us talking about the African dream and they're thinking, I need to get it, where can they find it?
Okay, for now, if you are in Nigeria, you can get it in Lagos, like a place like Lagos State University. You can get it in their library, Lagos State University in Lagos. You can also get it in Port Harcourt. You can also get it in the Niger Delta University in Yenegua, close to Port Harcourt. These are two major places you can get copies, as in the hard copies. Then the soft copies are available you can get it on Amazon, the African Dream ebook. You can get it on Amazon. But there are plans to see how the book can go further, to increase or improve upon the distribution network, so they can go to other parts of the country. The bishop, if you go to bishop, you will have few copies, in the different bishops. But this place is where I mentioned, and this is where you can have them in large quantity. And sometimes when they write to us, my organization based in Lagos, and the Mice and Heights, when anybody writes to us, we can always ship it to them, depending on the quantity that's required. So that's that for now.
Oh, awesome. Once again, thank you so much, Mr. Edoki. Thank you so much. I've learned a lot in this conversation, and I'm rest assured that our viewers as well have learned so much from the conversation that we had today. And it just reminded me of one proverb that I know, which says the best time to plant a tree was 20 years back. The second best time is now. And I think this is to say to an African leader out there, to an African young person out there, to an African man, an African woman out there, to say, we might have got it wrong some years back. We might have got us entangled into so many impoverishing plans so many years back, but this is our second best time. And like he said, there is still hope. And thank you so much for watching.
mikedipsonrecords.
Nigeria, you're the children of Nigeria, the daughters and sons of your land. Oh, how we believe in ya, you children of Nigeria. Reach out when we give you a hand. Your soul is unbreakable, the sky bows down to gently kiss your cheeks. So remarkable how you stay this strong when the world brings you to your knees. When things get hard, know that home is in your heart. Oh, when things get hard, know that home is in your heart. Oh, Nigeria, you're the children of Nigeria, the daughters and sons of your land. Oh, how we believe in ya, you children of Nigeria. Reach out when we give you a hand. Nigeria, you're the children of Nigeria, the daughters and sons of your land. Oh, how we believe in ya, you children of Nigeria. Reach out when we give you a hand.